Well, thanks so much for dropping by. It's time for another episode of Ask Boston Sax, the show where I take your questions about saxophone and anything else and actually answer them. Today we'll be exploring the real-world applications of string theory and how living in the multiverse affects your daily life. Hey Jack, I'm really interested in starting to learn how to repair the saxophone. However, I've noticed that there's not a lot of opportunities to learn how to do this. Where should I get started? Unfortunately, with instrument repair, it's something that's pretty difficult to learn simply because there's not that much information out there, and I am looking to fix this. We'll get to that in a second. Basically, if you're interested in learning how to repair horns, you don't have that many options right now. You can go to a trade school, which might offer a 2-year degree in learning the basics of woodwind repair, which means you're going to be learning how to work on a bunch of different instruments. I don't think there's any place that just specifies in saxophones. And those places are more geared towards going into a career of working in the band instrument world, which means doing rentals, more student instruments, which is kind of the bread and butter of how most people make a living fixing saxophones. There are very few of us that are fortunate enough to do this at a high level, only working on professional and vintage horns. And if you want to learn how to do that kind of work, really the only way to do it is to apprentice with someone. So first and foremost, if you're interested in learning how the saxophone works, I would recommend getting a student horn or something that you don't really care about messing up and just start taking it apart and putting it back together, one piece at a time, just so you can start to recognize the key work and then get an idea of how things move together. Now, the second step will be the Boston Sax Shop course on saxophone repair for saxophone players, which will be the very first of its kind, a digital course completely built around teaching you how to work on your own horn, which will be available early next year. Sorry, but not sorry for the shameless plug. Hey Boston Sax Shop, I have a relacquered Selmer Mark VI. I hate how it looks and I'm considering having it relacquered. What are your thoughts? Well, first off, don't judge your horn on how it looks. Love your saxophone and it will love you back. Don't judge a book by its cover. Now, that being said, I get it. You know, aesthetics are a big part of why we play this instrument, whether we're willing to admit it or not. I certainly am. I think it will be very cathartic for all of us to do the same. So if you want to have your saxophone relacquered, it's not as simple as just snapping your fingers and taking the finish off the horn. You have to remember that in order to do that, you're essentially going to have to overhaul the entire instrument, because in order to properly remove the lacquer, it's going to have to be chemically addressed. It's going to probably have to be buffed, which means some material is going to get removed, which means that all the pads, corks, felts, everything is going to have to be replaced. T-fitting is probably going to have to be done to make up for the material that is lost. So you have to really ask yourself, is it worth it? Because it's going to be a very expensive process, and I can guarantee you that it's not going to change the sound of your saxophone, which again, we couldn't even rule out that factor anyways, because everything else has to change. So again, if it's something that's really important to you, do it. You know, if it's going to make you happy, if it's going to make you play the saxophone more, that's all great. But just remember that there's a lot more involved than just changing the finish. Hey Boston Sax, I'm considering buying a vintage Selmer as an investment. If I buy a Mark VI, will the value continue to go up? And if so, how much? First off, I would never recommend buying a saxophone as an investment, because as soon as you buy it for that reason, if that's the main factor, there's no way you're going to enjoy it as much as if you just buy it to use it and have fun with it. You're always going to be like worried about that one little scratch that's going to detract from the value, and that just kind of takes the joy out of owning this thing. If you just want to put it on your shelf, that's a whole different story. But if you want to use it, use it. Now, there's no crystal ball out there that's going to tell us how things change. Just like the stock market, right? It's going to be affected by so many factors that we have no control over. And with vintage saxophones, we're talking about a collector's item. And with a collector's item, that means it's only worth as much as someone is willing to pay for it. Now, in my personal experience, I feel like the market hit its peak about 10 years ago. I think that we've kind of leveled out at this point. But again, who's to say what will happen in the future? Hey Jack, what are the key heights on the saxophone and how does that affect things? So a key height on the saxophone is referencing the space between the pad and the tone. It's the opening for which the column of air which is vibrating within the instrument is going to be released. Overall, the more open the key heights are on a saxophone, in a very general sense, this is going to give you a higher ceiling of volume and just more flexibility because there's inherently less back pressure because you have a larger opening for your air to be released. In general, it will also raise the pitch of the horn and give you more spread in terms of its projection. As you close down the key heights on the saxophone, you're going to center the tone because you're essentially forcing the air through a smaller gap, which means it's going to be more efficient and potentially respond quicker, but also give you a lower ceiling of volume because once you really start to lay into it with your air pressure, you are going to get more back pressure from the gaps literally being smaller. This can also lower the pitch of the saxophone. Overall, the key heights on a horn are one of the most overlooked factors that I see when we're setting up something here at Boston Sax Shop, and it can completely change how your saxophone will play, respond, and intonate. And it's something I really recommend sitting down with a respected technician and having customized for your exact needs.